The architecture of slavery. The hidden cost of PHARAOH. The city of PHARAOH was not just a capital, it was a statement of absolute power. To build it, Ramses II did not rely solely on Egyptian labor. He utilized thousands of prisoners of war, captured during his campaigns in Libya and the Levant. These living trophies were forced to work in the mud brick factories of the Delta. The economic advantage was clear: free labor, but the social costs was high. The presence of so many foreigners created a melting pot of tension and potential revolt. The construction of the royal palace alone consumed more cedar wood than the entire navy. This would had to be imported from the forests of Lebanon. Ramses paid for it with hundreds of thousands of bushels of grain and papyrus rolls. This trade was a massive drain on Egypt's agricultural reserves. Every luxury in the capital was paid for by the sweat of a farmer in Middle Egypt who would never see the city he was indirectly building. The gold fever. Beyond the Wadi. Hammamet. The quest for gold was an obsession that defined the royal treasury. Ramses II sent geological scouts deeper into the desert than any pharaoh before him. They were looking for the veins of the sun. When a new vein was discovered, a military outpost was immediately established. These outposts were expensive to maintain. Water had to be carried by donkey trains over 50 miles of scorching sand. The logistics of these gold mining camps were a masterpiece of ancient management. Rations were strictly calculated: 2 loaves of bread and a jar of beer per man per day. If a shipment of grain was late, the camp faced starvation. We have records of the overseer of the mines writing desperate letters to the vizier, begging for supplies before the workers turned to violence. Gold was the glory of Ramses, but for the men in the desert, it was a sentence of slow death. The Kadesh propaganda. A $1 billion lie. The Battle of Kadesh is often cited as the greatest chariot battle in history, but for dark records, it is the greatest marketing campaign in history. Ramses II nearly lost his life and his army due to poor intelligence. Yet upon his return, he commissioned the poem of Pentuer to be engraved on the walls of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel. The cost of these engravings alone would be equivalent to millions of dollars today. He spent a fortune to change the narrative. He hired poets to write about his divine courage and sculptors to depict him crushing thousands of Hittites alone. This was strategic spending. By appearing invincible, he could keep his vassals in line without having to fight expensive wars every year. It was peace through propaganda. But the reality was that Egypt had to sign a treaty and stop its northern expansion, a move that limited the empire's future tax revenue. The corruption of the scribes, the shadow economy. In the later years of Ramses' reign, the bureaucracy became a monster. There were scribes for the grain, scribes for the cattle, and scribes to watch the other scribes. This layer of administration was meant to prevent theft, but it invited corruption. High-ranking officials began to lose shipments of gold or undercount the harvest. This shadow economy meant that, while the official records showed a wealthy empire, the actual grain silos were often half empty. The elite were living in a bubble of luxury, protected by the aging pharaoh's reputation. Meanwhile, the village leaders were forced to extort the peasants to meet the impossible quotas set by the central government. The pressure was building, and the foundation of the state was cracking under the weight of its own greed. The cult of the living god. The cost of eternity. Ramses II was not just the king. He was a god on earth. To maintain this status, daily rituals in hundreds of temples had to be performed simultaneously. These rituals required rare incense from Punt, purple dyes from Phoenicia, and fine linen from the royal looms. The temple economy grew so large that it began to rival the state economy. The priests of Amun-Ra controlled more than 30% of the arable land in Egypt by the end of Ramses' reign. They were exempt from taxes and military service. Ramses allowed this because he needed the priests to validate his divinity. It was a deal with the devil. He gained spiritual power, but the state lost its primary source of income. This imbalance would eventually lead to the total collapse of the new kingdom centuries later. The naval race. Control of the Mediterranean. To protect his trade routes, Ramses II invested heavily in a professional navy. The warships of the Great Green, the Mediterranean, were built with a revolutionary design: sturdier hulls and better sails to outmaneuver the pirates of the north. This naval expansion required a massive amount of copper and tin for bronze weapons and fittings. The price of tin skyrocketed as the supply lines from Europe became unstable. Egypt had to trade its finest gold just to maintain its bronze production. Ramses was caught in a resource trap. He needed the military to protect the trade, but the cost of the military was destroying the profits of the trade. It was a zero-sum game that required constant victory to remain sustainable.